Good morning, everyone, both online and here with us in the KPMG Theatre. Thank you very much for making time to come to our event this morning, where we'll be talking about Thailand's aging society and the opportunities for businesses in Thailand, which both David and I think there is a lot. So firstly, let me introduce myself. So my name's Matt. I'm a partner at KPMG in Thailand. So I lead our infrastructure, government and healthcare sectors. So I'm the sector lead, and I'm also in our deal advisory practice. So I lead the deal strategy and value creation team. So that involves growth strategy, market entry, performance improvement in M&A or turnaround situations. David, maybe you can briefly introduce yourself.
David, I'm a partner in technology consulting. My area of specialization, my passion is healthcare. And that's specifically two words, healthcare, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Actually, I would say, if you think you're here for the Aging Society seminar, I think you're in the wrong room. Because actually, Thailand is already classed as a completely aged society. More than 20% of our population is already 60 and over. The next step for us is 2033, or maybe earlier, is to be a super aged society at 28%. And the only other super aged society right now is Japan. So just to put that into context, so the problem is not an aging society, we're already there and we have to respond.
Thanks, David. Okay, so agenda today, we'll start with the welcome introduction as we've just done, and then we're going to start with some macro trends in terms of healthcare and the aging society in Thailand, so just to sort of set the scene. And then we're going to go into the future of independent living and aged care, so we'll be sharing some examples and thoughts on what we're seeing in Thailand. And then where we'll then go into is case studies. So I think one thing we'll share a bit today is that Thailand's aged care society and infrastructure is still maturing, developing, but that's already happened in a lot of other overseas markets. So we'll be bringing a lot of that to the discussion today. And one thing I should have said earlier, you may have seen from the invite, we were expecting to have another speaker, Andy from 8Wire. Unfortunately, he's come down with an illness, so he wasn't able to join. But rest assured, we will be sharing the overview of 8Wire as a business and a case study from New Zealand to explain about how that works there. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways, and we will have a Q&A session. So for people in the room, please do ask any questions at that point in time. And for those on the WebEx, there'll be a Q&A available, so you can put your questions in the chat, and then we'll answer those at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get started. So this is a very macro slide, sort of what's going on in healthcare in Thailand. I think many of you in the room and on the call will know much about the healthcare society in Thailand. But look, I think a couple of things to highlight here. It is a growing sector. So here we have the Thailand health spending in billion baht and percentage to GDP. And you'll see from a CAGR perspective at the bottom here, it's looking to grow 6 to 8%. So if we compare that to GDP and other sectors, this is a growing sector in Thailand. I think we all know that, and that's probably why you're here today. And as a deals person, and we'll talk about this later, I get a lot of inquiries from either domestic companies or overseas companies saying, hey, how do I get into healthcare? How do I grow my business in that space? So a lot of opportunities in this sector. And then some of the growth drivers, we have healthcare digitalization. We can't have a webinar without talking about technology, AI, and healthcare is a prime sector for all of that. And Thailand, under the 4.0 policy, is really pushing and trying to digitalize healthcare. So that's one driver. And then the government support, foreign direct investment, as I've already mentioned, there is a lot of interest in the healthcare society in Thailand from overseas. And the government are also driving a lot of strategic investments and initiatives. So they have established a strategic medical hub with a focus on wellness and other areas. So that's happening as well. And then medical tourism, again, doesn't feel right to talk about healthcare in Thailand without talking about medical tourism. Had a project recently with a business, and they were asking me, oh, surely there's a lot of opportunity in medical tourism. And yes, there is. But actually, there's only specific opportunities for certain areas and certain people. So that is obviously a big growth area for Thailand and an area of interest. And then lastly, and obviously the topic of today, is the aging population. So we'll talk about that over the following slides, but that is obviously a key driver for the healthcare sector in Thailand. Okay, so as David already alluded to, Thailand is an age society, actually. So by 2030, it's anticipated that over 20% of Thailand's population will be 65 years or older. And you'll see that here. And as David said, there's one of the fastest aging in the world. And in ASEAN, it's only Singapore that has a faster aged or more aged society. But as David's already said, Singapore is a more developed market. So that means there's different challenges, different infrastructure. Again, enablers. So there is some ASEAN collaboration. So they've established an ASEAN Center for Active Aging and Innovation. So there are ASEAN regions where this is a collective regional issue that we're all trying to work together to fix. There's a regulation I've already talked about. There does need to be focus on the regulations around aged care, make sure it's at the right standards for people's needs. And then lastly, again, technology, as we've already mentioned, there's a lot of focus on technology and how that can play a role in supporting the age society.
We'll talk a little bit about just what COVID exposed in all of this area. I mean, I think I come from the UK, and the way seniors are treated in the UK, they get put in retirement villages or retirement homes, nursing homes. And then what the government's response to COVID was actually discharging people who were still sick into those places. And as a result, COVID ran riot throughout those facilities. And what we'll see later on is some of that distrust that society now has in some of these institutions that have been created, and how we really should be putting a lot more care and attention how we treat and look after our frail and senior people as they head towards the end of their life.
So one topic, I think we'll focus a lot today on more of the infrastructure and elderly care centres and the value chain all around the ageing society. One thing we're not going to talk a lot about later, but I wanted to highlight here, is around the diseases and what having an aged society means in terms of healthcare needs, different conditions. So we've highlighted here a few particular diseases such as hypertension, osteoporosis. So these are things that as healthcare practitioners and those potentially in medical devices or life sciences, I think these are the areas that there's already a lot of investment and interest in, and we know that there's going to be a greater prevalence of these sorts of diseases. The ones that are not on here are obviously oncology, so cancer, that is already relatively high prevalence here in Thailand, and that will also increase with the aging society. Other things such as diabetes. So there's other conditions as well, and I think just wanted to make the point that for certain businesses, life sciences, maybe even FMCGs looking to enter into the healthcare space, these are the sorts of areas that we're seeing clients focus on and look to invest now, so that as the age society develops, their products and services are in the market.
I would just add, I see some people here from pharmaceuticals and life sciences. Thank you for joining. What I would say is this. Our ability to treat many of these diseases you're talking about is already well advanced. Thailand's ability to respond to cancer is actually very developed, and it is actually recognized as one of the best places in Southeast Asia to actually, if you're diagnosed with cancer, to be treated. You could live way into your 80s now in Thailand, way into your 80s. I've got people around me who are in their 90s. You might die with cancer, but typically in Thailand, you're not going to die of cancer. You're going to die of something else. And we were at an event last week talking about life sciences generally, more broadly, and in there we spoke about personalized medicine. If we think about seniors as a group where personalization is actually an opportunity, and we might think, historically, we understand certain diseases very well, and they tend to be simple diseases, and we understand the vector, and we're able to treat them. We think about this group, we start thinking about Parkinson's, dementia, some of these things that are much more complicated and actually harder to treat. And this is also where the opportunity is. There is an awful lot of money globally going into research around things like Huntington's and Parkinson's and motor neuron disease and some of these things that are difficult. And I think there is an opportunity to do some of that because we will see those things emerge in this society.
Okay, and then just to share a little bit back on the sort of elderly care center space. So yeah, there was a survey undertaken, a few years ago now, but asking elderly people what is their preference from a real estate perspective in terms of living. So 32% are interested in living in an elderly care center. So that's quite interesting. I think there's maybe a shift in dynamics and the drivers for that. There are still a high proportion who are also looking to stay in a single house, so want their privacy, want their independence. But I think we're certainly seeing a shift towards an understanding of elderly care centers in Thailand and a need for them. And you'll see on the right-hand side of the page here, we've got some examples of the different types of elderly care service that we can have here in Thailand. So there's daycare. So some people may just want to go receive their care or treatment for the day and then return back to their home. There's long stay, so actually the elderly care centers that we're talking about, where people actually will move permanently into those facilities and get the support they need. And then there's also home care. So as I said, there is still a preference for many people, 35% who still want to be single house or maybe even at home. So there's a few different angles here, a few different opportunities, and it's important that I think as the elderly care facilities and infrastructure develop in Thailand, we're considering the demands of not only the local elderly in Thailand, but also the overseas who we may want to try and attract to come over to Thailand.
Yeah, so the Real Estate Information Center actually posted a report that said between 2018 and 2023, there was a 25% increase in, I'm looking at these two, not so much home care, but like facilities, daycare, long stay, nursing homes. 25% annual increase in those kinds of businesses, registered businesses. There are now more than 800 of these kind of facilities around Thailand. So as Matt said, it's an emerging, maturing opportunity. What I would then say is, as you know, I talked about earlier, where are we in standards around some of those areas? You know, what are we actually seeing? And I think about something like Ban Lalisa in Chiang Mai, which actually is an interesting convergence between Thais with dementia and Alzheimer's, those kind of cognitive diseases, and also people coming in already from overseas, Germany, the UK, Switzerland, coming in, and they are bringing their people who have dementia, and they're putting them in a home. And I said one of the questions that actually came in before the event started was, what do we see about, what is it about Thailand that makes it interesting for some of those things? And I would say, having lived here for 21 years, just the way Thai people are, generally have a lot of empathy for the seniors, and the way that they would then approach those people, very, very patient, very caring, and I think that is a real opportunity for the Land of Smiles to really embrace some of that as an opportunity.
Yeah, and just building on David's point there, this data is a little bit out of date, but yeah, we can see the elderly care businesses that are being registered in Thailand, significantly growing. And at this point, there was 500. I think, as David said, we think there's now around 800 already set up. And yeah, as I said earlier, and I can share later, I get a lot of inquiries on a sort of weekly, monthly basis about people looking to come to Thailand, invest, or also domestic businesses looking to set up these elderly care operators. And you'll see here some of these examples. I think some of you will be familiar with these names. So some of these are still relatively new. They're not fully up and operating. Some of them are up and operating. And I think for some of these now, they're now looking at, okay, how do we scale? How do we attract elderly to come and live in these care centers? So really interesting to see many of these companies starting to establish already. And yeah, we see a lot of opportunity going forward as well.
So let's just talk about a couple of things very quickly. Obviously, we've already spoken about we are already a classed as an aged society already and becoming a super age society. So we have a population demographic change. The other thing I would put in here as we start thinking about home care is I've been here 21 years. When I first arrived, it wasn't uncommon to have 3 or 4 generations living under one roof, 6 more people in under one roof. I'm increasingly seeing, for a couple of reasons, that is not so common anymore. Part of it is Thais are deferring getting married way into their 30s and beyond. Some of them are choosing not to get married at all. Some are choosing not to have kids. That is compounding some of these factors. But also, the other thing I would say is Thailand still is a single city economy. there is a lot of economic migration. People are coming in from the northeast, from the north, from the south into Bangkok, and that leaves people living at home, getting older, living on their own. So there is a need for independent living. There is a need for these people to have some sort of safety net. And with more and more Thais going to overseas to study and maybe living there for many years before coming back, we have this gap in the safety system and how we safeguard older people. And I do think there is an opportunity for some people to come into the market, take advantage of that, and not actually deliver the standards of care that these people actually deserve. We're also seeing an increased prevalence in dementia. We've spoken about it already in some areas. Some of these cognitive diseases that we're seeing, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, as people get older, we're going to see more of that. The average life expectancy for a female is 79 years. I actually think that's a little bit under. I see people who are way older than that. And so what all that really comes is an increasing pressure on society to solve this problem, an increasing pressure on governments to help solve this problem. Our government, in some ways, actually compounds this problem for two reasons. One, we are competing with Malaysia, and we'll talk about this as a destination. Malaysia is far easier and actually cheaper for expats to go and retire in Malaysia than Thailand. And the visa systems doesn't readily support people coming in to be an expat retiree in Thailand. One. Two, some of the ways, and I really appreciate what we do in government sectors, AOT and others, and if you work for that agency, you get housing until you retire. And then what happens? And so there are organizations like the Thai Red Cross with Sawang Kaniwe, who actually have a facility, 400 people live there, and they are nearly all of them single women who've left government service and they've got nowhere to live. So this is part of the response. And so we're seeing this upward trend and this upward pressure that we have to solve this. This problem is not a single industry's problem to solve. It's a combination of healthcare, it's a combination of pharmaceuticals, it's a combination of regulation, and it is absolutely a combination of actually how do we build the right facilities or repurpose facilities that already exist, right? I look at something like Ban Lalisao, I already mentioned. It was built as a muban, as a village, and they didn't sell all the properties. So someone came in and went, okay, we'll re-asset those and we will turn it into a dementia care facility. We're not going to sell them as houses. They will be units that will be used and essentially rent long term until that person is no longer with us, and then we release that asset. And we'll talk about one version of that I've experienced living in New Zealand. So, COVID, we've spoken about it. You can't really talk anything these days without talking about it. Why are we talking about it here? We're talking about it here for a couple of reasons. Many technologists around the world would say COVID forced 10 years worth of change in technology and digital in 2 years or less. So on the backside of this curve, we have an opportunity to use some of the things that we've learned how to do better, faster, more efficiently with technology because of COVID. I would also look at this from a distance if I sort of squint at it and I would go, this potentially could look like what our aging society profile looks like. We have a growing problem that we need to solve. We will then start to respond to that, and then we will get into a new normal around how we deal with an aged society. So if you look at this as a curve, as a forcing function, as a need to transform, this, I think, is a good pattern that we will probably see play out with aged care more generally. So let's talk about this a little bit. So there are people who are born now, like already, or will be born this year, who could quite easily expect to live to 100. Roughly every 10 years, we add 1 year of life expectancy to a person. So there are people who could happily live to 100 years old. And we would expect them to maybe go through multiple careers, maybe go back into education. And what does that mean at the back end of this? So think about mandatory retirement in Thailand at 60. If I'm going to live to 100, I work for 30-something years, I now have to live for 40 years on what? So I have to really compound all of my earnings, and I've got to think about really stretching that out. The figure I saw this morning is, one report says I need 4.3 million baht to retire comfortably at the age of 60 and live to a natural end of my life. If I'm coming in as an expat, I need $389,000 that would allow me to live comfortably with rent, and then kind of just going 15% of my time I go and eat in a nice restaurant, and the rest of the time I'm eating, grab and coming in from the street. That is a third of the price, a cost of Singapore and Hong Kong, but more expensive than Malaysia. But what does that really mean? So we think about what this looks like at the beginning, and we understand that. But we're going to look at this end. So we're going to be thinking about personal budgets. And we'll talk about a case study in a minute where there's this in Korea. So if you think about the role of insurers as part of this response, cash products. As I get older, it's not just about health insurance, it's about assurance. I should be able to get an amount of money that I can then choose to do what I want with it as I see fit, with good advice. We're going to talk about what that then means for me, personally, my care plan, and we'll talk about choice and active choice as well in a second. Me, as a grown child, I have to think about this for my parents. I'm fortunate enough to live in Thailand, but all of my parents live in the UK. And I'm worried about the decreasing service of the NHS and the ability of the social care system in the UK to look after them. I'm already starting to think about, I'm not only thinking about my retirement, I'm thinking about what do I need to do to support them so they can still live long and healthy lives in the UK. And then finally, the choices we have to make about end-of-life planning and dying with dignity. All of this is fundamentally driven by data, and when we look at it in one way. I would talk about this from a healthcare perspective in terms of a shared care record, and when we talk about 8Wire, this is essentially what they do. So what does that look like then? So as we said, 28% of the population of Thailand will be 60 or older by 2033. We will be a super aged society. I spent 5 years in New Zealand, and there is a system there called the Ryman Healthcare business. And what they essentially do is, I may have had kids, I may not. I'm living in a house, maybe 4 bedrooms. I'm retired. I don't need that asset anymore. So they will buy that from me at fair value, and they put it into a fund. I move into this facility that is a full continuum from independent living. I'm living in my own house. I can choose to have people come in and provide services to me, laundry and bits and cleaning services. I can then move into active care where I've got someone living with me on site, all the way through to palliative care and end of life in that same facility. There's a hospital on site, there is physiotherapy on site, there is a community in terms of events and entertainment. In most markets around the world, most people want to live in something like that, and that is growing anywhere between 5% and 15%. Today, about 1.9, 2% of Thais live in this kind of facility. So there is obviously an opportunity to provide this infrastructure for the community. Probably 8 years ago now, there was a report came out from BBC Capital that said Thailand was ranked 7th in the world of a place to retire to. If I was to go back and look at that again now, I would maybe move that up, because some of the countries at the top, Panama, not particularly stable at the moment economically. They are currently actively relocating people from low-lying areas because of increasing sea levels. Ecuador, not particularly stable at the moment, surrounded with lots and lots of risky countries. Spain, probably about to go bankrupt, if we're honest, in terms of how it's responded to euro. Malta, super dense, expensive. Malaysia and us. So there is and Portugal. So there is an opportunity for us to attract inbound people, expats, to be retirees in Thailand. Okay, so if you think about this then as a multi-response, as an ecosystem, as a multi-sided platform, and I look at normally, if I would look at the right-hand side, left-hand side of this, as you look at it, this is more from a healthcare perspective, but if I put a lens on this around senior living, there are some things that seniors need that we as younger people, I won't call myself young anymore, younger people would look at. As we get older, we need to start thinking about quality of life versus quantity of life. Restrictive practices, do not resuscitate, don't put me on a ventilator, all of those things. And we'll talk about that in a second, about how some of those conversations sound like. Old people have lived a long and rich life, and they really want those conversations to be about them and their experiences and what really matters to them. And the final thing in here is I would say as a technologist, we can solve many of these problems with technology. But that shouldn't be used as a replacement for just actually sometimes the best treatment for some of these people is just sitting with them, talking with them, and treating them with respect, what we might call a white glove experience. So technology shouldn't displace that. In the Nordics, we would talk about the ESTER principle, and ESTER is not an acronym. It is the most common name of an 80-year-old grandmother. It's what it came out from Norway, Sweden, Denmark. And the ESTER principle flips what we think of as healthcare on its head. You go and see a doctor and they say, what's wrong with you? What's the matter with you, Matt? The ESTER principle flips that on its head. What matters to Matt? What matters to Esther? What does she care about? Does she want to be put on a tube? Does she want to be ventilated? Does she just want to have her life dragged out? Or is it actually a conversation that says, what is the minimum standard you're willing to live at? And if the treatment I need to diagnose to you is going to be below that, do you want to pursue that or not? So it's not about dragging someone's life out. It's about giving them the best quality of life for the time they have left. But we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute in terms of a capability model. We look at this side. On this side, we've got nursing services. We've got mind care. We spoke a little bit about dementia. We now need to think about cognitive behavior. We need to think about cognitive therapy, actually making sure that these people who may have suffered a stroke, how do we do brain training? How do we keep them entertained? How do we keep them active? So it's no longer about healthcare, one word. It's about healthcare. It's not just me as a person. It's me as a mind, as a human being, and holistic wellness. So we're already seeing some of these things in Thailand. True Health, Mordi, so Prudential and a few others use Mordi as a teleconsultation service. Prudential also have Med at Home. So if I'm an older person and it is a struggle and an effort for me to get in a taxi and go to a hospital, the hospital will come to me. They'll do blood draws, they'll do basic triage and some of those aspects around observations, and they report that back in. Health at Home. So Chersey and other people will use Harmony. Health at Home is another service where I can actually match and I can bring people in. If I've got an older person living in my house with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, I can actually select someone to come and live with me or care on a daily basis. And there is a whole series of services that we go through. Okay, so we talked a little bit about 8Wire, and unfortunately Andy couldn't be here. So 8Wire, what 8Wire do is they're basically a trusted data exchange. And they started in New Zealand. They started in the combination between justice and social care. And their remit, their whole mission is to join up industries where data, if we could actually share it near real time, would provide more value to both industries and a person. And where they started was the gap between police and social care, particularly around domestic abuse. So I would show up as a care worker and I would see that this child is at risk of being beaten up or harmed, and there was no easy way to report that to police. Police might turn up at a domestic incident, and they had no way of reporting to the social care system, and so 8Wire said, oh, we can join that up, because it's just reporting, right? It's just data, so they joined that up. Over time, they've built out, and they've built a couple of different parts of this business. They've built one called Surely, which is targeted at insurers, hence the name. And what I would do, if I'm an agent trying to sell insurance, I would be able to do, through a trusted data sharing agreement, go, okay, David is applying for insurance. We know he goes to Piatai, we know he goes to Bumangrat, we know he goes to Samitiwet. Okay, what does those three hospitals know about David's treatment over time? And it would then provide that report, summarize it, and allow the agent to make a quick decision on whether this person has pre-existing conditions and a bunch of stuff. The other one they've done is called Medically, and that works on the other side of the business. So this works with, it integrates with electronic health systems, patient information systems, and it allows you to do clinical notes and actually just integrate back down in. So what do? So they work with Ryman Healthcare that I spoke about. And outside of normal hours, older people, and you probably see this, feel that they're a burden, and they don't want to just, oh, I'm phoning someone up and someone's going to come to my house, whatever. But they will happily talk to a teleconsultation process because they don't feel that they're actually getting someone out of bed. So what they do is they do this. The old person, senior person, oops, it's gone too far. Sorry, come on, clicker. Come on, clicker. Demo gods, demo gods. Okay, so they start the teleconsultation process, and the dialogue happens between something like a nurse practitioner sitting in a contact center who can give advice, and that senior person living at home. the nurse practitioner wants to know more information about this person. They can tell you what they know, but actually they may not be fully involved in their care, and they don't actually know exactly what's going on always. So they would use Surely, and they make a request into a trusted exchange, a contracted model that says, tell me everything you know about David, and give that to me on my screen while I'm talking to David. And they go off and they would come up with diagnosis, and they might prescribe something, and they give me a treatment plan. What they then do is they use Medically, and they insert that clinical note back into the electronic health record. So now when I turn up at the hospital tomorrow, they know exactly who I spoke to, what that person diagnosed, what they suggested I should do. And so we've closed the loop now between teleconsultation and in-present point-of-care healthcare delivery. And this is what they're doing right now inside New Zealand, inside Ryman. Now, they can do it because, unlike us, they actually have all of that information is available in the New Zealand healthcare system. So there is an opportunity here between private hospitals, insurers, people like SSO, to make this available in the data available so it can be shared. Okay, so what would it look like to build one of these? If I look at this capability model, we're a business, so we have to have sales and marketing. How do we refer, how do we recruit people to come and live in our facilities? We have to provide those facilities. We need to think about dietary needs, allergies, laundry services, at-home care, cleaning services. Starts to sound a bit like a hotel, right? But effectively, this is what it is. But it's not someone checking in for 2 nights. It's someone checking in for the next 20 years, right? And what that really means is we have to then provide long-term services, entertainment, cognitive health, mind care services. And because we're a business, we also need to do billing, get paid for doing what we do, and we need to think about workforce, and we need to think about recruitment.
And David, maybe to just add quickly, all these capabilities exist in Thailand today, right? I think there's a lot of fantastic stuff happening in Thailand across all these areas. This is probably not integrated yet in order to service that need of the aged and elderly care. So again, it just alludes to that there's a great opportunity here, and I know many companies are already exploring it, but just to bring all this together into the right integrated framework and service the need.
So as I said, we think of it as an ecosystem. It's not one company trying to solve this problem. It will be a handful of companies working together in partnership, sharing information, sharing ideas, working together as a consortium to solve this problem. And that is Brooksa, Sansiri building the right kind of facilities. That is hospitals embedding clinics. It is thinking about geriatrics as a profession again. And actually, while I talk about geriatrics, if you really want to understand what it is to be an older person living in a healthcare system today that is not designed for older people, I would recommend this book, Atul Gawande, Being Mortal. So he's an endocrinologist by trade. He's a doctor from a family of doctors, and it actually talks about his personal story about dealing with his father and everything that goes through and making choices about what does my dad care about as he gets to the end of life, do we resuscitate, all of the stuff we've spoken about. And is a real eye-opener on just the state of aged care in somewhere like a developed country like the US. And it really does talk about geriatrics. Now, I said something yesterday that I actually went off and validated. I said to myself, when I turn up at all the hospitals I go to, I'm not aware of any kind of geriatric center. But, interestingly, Sirirat, in February this year, actually turned on their geriatric center of medicine. And you can do a walk-up as an OPD if you're in Samut Sakhon. So we are responding. As we said, it's not mature, it's a maturing market. Healthcare systems are beginning to respond to this. We see Bumrungrad building a holistic wellness center. They're building their second campus in Phuket. So organizations are responding, but we need to do more and we need to do faster. We, KPMG, would talk about connected. This is our way of thinking about transformation and strategy and kind of and what we do. And there are 8 things on here. I'm not going to talk about all of them. And I'm not expecting you to read this. But I'm just going to look at a couple of them. Let's look at innovative services. We've spoken about what COVID did in terms of forcing digital transformation. And we've spoken a little bit about Mardi and home and Harmony and health at home. What do we do to bring innovative services designed specifically for older people? Furniture, homes, SCG responding with how to retrofit a Kuntanin already did, like probably 5 years ago, came up with a low-salt diet for CPF to go and distribute through to the elder community. So how do we think about innovative services designed specifically for older people? The other one I'm going to talk about a little bit is about aligned and empowered workforce. And again, one of the questions we had before the event was, what is about Thailand that actually makes us good at this? And as I said, Thais have a lot of empathy for older people and actually just generally very patient and very caring. But having lots and lots of people, and this is what the UK has learned, having people who just look after people is not enough. Those people need to be rewarded for that. It's hard work. It's rewarding in one sense, but it's also can be very depressing. A person dealing with dementia every day, you deal with the same person, they don't know who you are, and you go through the ritual every day of like telling them who you are. So you need to recruit the right kind of people, you need to train them, and these people need to be skilled and reskilled, and there is a way of doing that through technology and through workforce management. And we need to make sure we've got enough of them in the right place. Again, Thailand is a one-city economy. A lot of this is going to be needed out of Bangkok. How do we make sure we've got those well-paying, skilled jobs out of Bangkok? It's not a Bangkok problem, it's a Thailand problem. Okay. We'll pick through a few of these things very quickly, and again, I'm not expecting you to read all of these. What I would like to draw your attention to, if you look at the top right-hand corner as you look at it, have a look at where these countries are, and as we get through to the end, we'll talk about what that looks like. So, Korea. This is about how something like SSO would respond to this. I spoke a little bit about cash products with insurance and assurance. What this provides is an older person to have a meaningful income that they can then say, so we talked about personal care budgets. I want to spend this in a way that is right for me. It's not just about healthcare, it's about mobility. It's about being able to go and meet my family. It's about bringing in a carer. It's about having services, which means I don't have to bend down and mop the floor. Do something like actually choosing how and where I spend that money so I can live a healthy, happy life. Again, Korea. What they do with community. So I'm not isolated. One of the biggest killers of old people, as we learned through COVID, is social isolation. And these people need to be integrated back into a community of like-minded people. And we're seeing great experiments in some countries around the world where actually, so tomorrow is the election in the UK. One of the things Rishi Sunak promises is something a bit like a national service. And that doesn't mean being in the army, it means doing something for the community. There are already places where I would have young people at school, they go for a few hours a day and they sit in a facility like this. And it actually creates an interesting dynamic. The older people who may have gone through the Second World War or some of these things can actually share some of that experience, what it means to be a citizen of this country. The young people can then go, hey, look at this thing, it's called a mobile phone, and here's how you use Line. And so these senior people then can get skilled in how to use technology, which, as we talked about, allows them to be active participants in their own care over time. We might call it reverse mentoring at some level. Dementia, we've spoken about the prevalence of dementia. The biggest problem in dementia is wandering. People leave their home, they don't know where they live, they don't know where they are, and you need a support system that allows these people to then be picked up and actually deposited back at home. Japan started this a long time ago, where you can actually have a QR code tattooed onto your hand, which a policeman could turn up, scan the QR, then exactly who you are, where you live, and then take you back.
A permanent tattoo?
A permanent QR code tattoo, yeah. So just don't move. But just wandering generally and kind of how we deal with mind care is a problem for us, and we need to think about how we deal with it. Singapore. So workforce, we spoke a little bit about workforce. This allows your independent needs through personal care, budgeting and planning. This is what I need. I log into this system, and it allows me to be matched with a care worker who can provide those needs. It also provides a learning platform for care workers to be re-educated, re-skilled. So as we get the balance in any double-sided platform, the balance between demand and supply, as we see an increase in demand for a certain service, it allows the platform to recruit and train people on the supply side so that we can actually get better matching between demand and supply. I actually did this with Grab in Indonesia when I was in my previous role. So Grab, you think of Grab as matching people who need a trip or food with people who can deliver it or drive you. Interesting thing about Grab in Indonesia, probably here, the people who tend to work in that kind of work, their family are also typically unemployed, underemployed, or seen as unemployable. So one of the things I did with Grab as they started to think about expanding beyond trips was, how do I now use these unemployed women working at home, living at home, working at home because it's homework, how do we use those skills? How do we get them on the platform? So, hey, you've got a food and beverage business and they need a deep clean of their kitchen. Here's somebody who happens to be married to a Grab driver who can put themselves on the platform as, I can do that for you and I can get paid for doing that work. And so you're expanding the integration and the community that Grab already has with drivers and businesses, and you're providing them additional services. I designed this with them in Indonesia to do this kind of stuff. Not this is more skilled than that, but you can see how the opportunity arises. And then quickly from Australia, so this idea of, I want to live in my own home, I don't want to be isolated, and richly what that looks like as a person-centered virtual community. During COVID, one of the things I did in the UK was I rolled out virtual wards. So because of lockdown and bubbles and all that stuff, there were people who needed chemotherapy at home and needed to be tracked. You don't want to bring them into a high-risk environment like a hospital, so we created virtual wards. So doctors can view them, they can talk to them. This is the same basic process. If I'm an older person and I've got some needs around physiotherapy and bits and pieces, I can do a lot of that online. I can do a lot of that through coaching and education. And we have those platforms. We already have them. Instagram, YouTube, right? How do we use those things to create that connectivity and that social inclusion? And again, the reason why I left this one in here, it's that, but away from Bangkok. How do we do this in the remote parts of Kanchanaburi? How do we do this in Ubon Ratchathani? How do we do this in some of the places that are isolated but are connected? Because as 5G continues to roll out around the country, how do we provide that platforms that allow these people who still want to live in their home, they've got some kind of support system around them, and they know where they live, they're comfortable where they live, they know everybody, they feel happy. How do we allow them to continue to live there in an independent and healthy way? One of the ways we do that is with technology and communication. I'll skip through that one. So, what I would say, look at the logos, look at the flags. Australia, Singapore, Korea, US, developed markets. Thailand's problem is simply this: we got old before we got rich. But I'm hopeful and optimistic. I've been here long enough and I see the grassroots innovation that Thai people do. Right? Frugality drives necessity. I'm absolutely hopeful that we can go into some of these areas, learn from what these countries have done, and we can do it in a way that is more efficient, cheaper, better for everybody we need to help work with.
Thanks, David. I think, yeah, really great case studies, and yeah, totally echo what David said. There's lots of great stuff happening outside of Thailand, technology-driven. And one thing I wanted to highlight on all those case studies, you'll see at the bottom, we had sort of outcomes. And I think, again, there's this outcome focus. What are we trying to achieve here in delivering healthcare? Reduced hospitalization rate, reduced social issues. So there's a lot of benefits to be had from this, solving this whole problem. So a few key takeaways before we go into some Q&A session. So I think, first one, this is a cross-industry and society challenge and issue. So we've talked about, obviously, there's the hospital providers, the life sciences companies, technology providers, data, government, insurance. One we didn't talk about actually was the banks. I think financial institutions also have a role to play in this as well. How do they provide financial products that are going to align and meet some of these needs as well?
But more than just that. I mean, actually, one of the numbers in here that I didn't read out was already these people we're talking about, 25% of them already active internet users. And the banks had a role in that too. Prompt Pay, G-Wallet, right? So there is a role, and I actually went to, so I used to work at Microsoft, and we would take customers to Redmond, and we would do a thing called an executive briefing center. I actually hosted Grung Thai Bank at one of these events. And without saying too much, they were miscued. Somebody came in thinking they were going to talk about banking. And they said, look, collectively, 14 of us, we've got 400 years of experience of banking. I don't think you can teach us anything about banking, but that's not why we're here. We want to learn about our role as the government payroll bank in education, social mobility, healthcare, all of those things that we're talking about here, in their role in distributing funds. GSB is the same, right? You think about what they're doing in terms of the next rollout of dividend. What is the role in banks in driving financial products? Yes, but education, inclusion, and the role they have through the window they have through a mobile phone, through something like G-Wallet, to actually work with these people and find out a little bit more about where they are, what they do, what they like, and how do we respond to that.
And then second point, I think we said already, there's an opportunity, but also we like to say a responsibility, I think, for all of us, and, you know, KPMG included as a professional services firm. I think, you know, yes, there's an opportunity, and we're all in business and corporate way of thinking, but there's a responsibility. I think, you know, David and I are lucky enough to live in this country, and I think we'd all feel, a responsibility that we want to fix this issue. So 50 years, then, yeah, Thailand's thriving. We have a solution for these challenges, and, yeah, we're showing the rest of the world how to manage it.
I would like to have this problem solved before I get to 60.
Well, exactly. David and I have maybe a self-interest in fixing this problem. And then digital tools and technology, again, we've talked about a number of times already, but it does have a critical role. And we've seen this stuff happening. We talked about Mordi, True Health. One observation I would say, and, you know, in some of those telemedicine, maybe the early adoption has been a bit slow, but it is rapidly growing. And I think something like that, you know, it's like an iPhone, right? Some of you may not be young enough to remember when the iPhone came out, but, you know, no one really, maybe the odd person had it, or it wasn't really a thing. And then suddenly, now everyone's got an iPhone, right?
You mean there was a time before iPhones?
I heard so, yeah, apparently, yeah. So I do think there is a little bit of resistance against telemedicine, and that's not just in Thailand, that's in other parts of the world as well. But I do think it will be one of those things that will suddenly rapidly change in a short space of time.
Just to be clear, though, just to be clear, the resistance to telemedicine is not actually from patients. This is why this can't be solved through one industry. The resistance to telemedicine is about how the doctors get paid. They effectively get paid more for seeing you in person than they do over a video consultation. So whilst telemedicine massively scaled out in the US during COVID, it is rapidly unraveling, because the way that doctors are funded in the US, particularly primary care clinics, is they rely on people walking into them and they get paid for that. So it is about incentives. Most of this is really at the heart of it about incentives. What is the incentive for pharmaceutical organizations to produce the right kind of orphan drugs that older people need? What is the incentive for these people to do the research? What is the incentive for the housing developers to build the right kind of housing in the right place? What is the incentive for SSO to make sure that beyond healthcare, life insurance, maternity care, what is their responsibility in incentivizing them to provide long-term health income, which is one of that career story, right? A long-term health insurance, long-term insurance commitment, so I can then choose what I do with that money, right? So it's fundamentally about an incentives problem. Right?
Yeah, you're right. The technology is there, and we have it. But how do we get everyone to use it and incentivize all the right parties to do so? And then I think hopefully the reason you're all here or joining us on the webinar is you realize this fourth point here, that I think every business in Thailand or the majority need to be thinking about how is this relevant for your industry, your business, what are the opportunities, what are the responsibilities you have as a business in your sector to react to this and start thinking about it now. It may take, as we've already explained, a few more years to evolve and develop, but I think now's the time to be thinking about it. And as we've seen already, there's a number of people doing that, 800 or so already elderly care centers up and running. And then lastly, again, I've alluded to it already a few times, and the case studies demonstrated that there are lots of great capabilities overseas, Korea, Japan, Singapore, Australia, US, where they've been thinking about this problem for a number of years and trying, maybe failing in some cases, I think, already. But they've got things that are working. And again, from my perspective, that's where I do see some of these overseas experts, capabilities. They're approaching us at KPMG saying, hey, we see the aging society. How do we come and help solve this problem? Who should we be talking to in Thailand? And I do think whilst we have great capability here in Thailand, I think we will need to lean on and leverage some of these experts from overseas, and that's how we make it a success.
And the timing is right. I mean, we've already spoken about some of the burning points in time, 3 years out, 5 years out, what it means for us. A very good friend of mine in Singapore started a business. He's evolved that business subsequently, which was essentially this. So I could live as an older person, live in my apartment, live in my house. And what they would basically do, they turn up, they put in what looks a bit like a Wi-Fi router and a bunch of sensors, door sensors, water sensors, a whole bunch of stuff, room sensors like we've got in here, so you know when people are in here, the lights come on, that kind of stuff. And they would then push that out, and they would collect all that data. Why would they do that? One, dementia, we talked about, wandering. Has the person left? One of the sensors was a Bluetooth fob on a key ring. Have they left their keys behind? And now where are they? So they may be wandering around. Like, what do we do about that? One of them was a water sensor. Dementia patient, something, doesn't matter if they've got dementia, but they've left the water running in the sink, and now there's water all over the kitchen floor. Okay, let's go and send someone to go and turn the water off for one thing and find out what's going to happen to them, right? Have they fallen over? Have they fainted? And the other one was interesting, which was, and this is about how we use data and data science and bits and pieces. One of the room sensors was in the bathroom. And so it would then track, this person's now been to the bathroom 5 times between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. That's abnormal. We know what their normal pattern is. This looks different. What is it? It's a 80% marker for a urinary tract infection. So let's actually go and talk to them. Let's have a teleconsult and talk about how we can help them. So these are the things that they were doing, and they were doing this 5 years ago in Singapore. The challenge for them, pre-COVID and bits and pieces, was they couldn't turn it into a profitable business. But I think now the timing, a lot of that technology is way, way cheaper, right? And there is more need for it now. And I think there are there's an organization in the UK that does something similar called MeCare. What he has actually done, which is also super interesting, and we spoke a little bit about it here as well. As part of that, he ended up doing a deal with Fitbit. And so as part of that was a wrist sensor for tracking things like heart rate and all that stuff, which it does. What they found very quickly was by how that person moves and how their Fitbit is tracking motion, the start-stop gait problem of a Parkinson's patient, they could actually get a much earlier signal on this person possibly has Parkinson's before there was actually real physical symptoms, and so they could make an intervention. When I worked at Microsoft, one of the other things we did was a version of that, which Microsoft don't have it anymore. You know how you put your Garmin on your wrist and it knows you're wearing it? One of the reasons it does that is it uses electric conductivity in your skin to know you're wearing it. Somebody much smarter than me worked out by using that, we get a 30-minute warning of an epileptic fit. And we can then push a notification to say, go and sit somewhere safe because you're going to have an incident. And this is where technology and healthcare and all that stuff comes together. And I think there are great opportunities with senior care as well.
And just made me think, actually, like some of these technologies we're talking about here, there's probably, well, there definitely is, right, other technologies that in 10, 20 years will be there. We don't even know what those are now, right? But they will be here, and they'll be also helping solve these problems. Okay, so that was everything from us. Oh, sorry, one last slide. Forgot about this one. So yeah, I think as David alluded to, and look, I think most of you are familiar with us at KPMG. We do have in-depth healthcare and capability. And yeah, we've done a lot of this around the region as we've shared some of those case studies. Some of those we were involved in at KPMG. So yeah, if there's anything that you think we can support you with, or you want to have a further discussion, yeah, here are some of the things that we can help you with, whether it's technology, risk, governance, data, feasibility studies, partnerships, you know, all of those things at KPMG we're happy to support and help you with.
And as we said a few times, this needs a combined response to this problem. One of the things Matt's team does is M&A, buy-side, JV assistance. how do we build a consortium to solve some of these problems? How do we work with people from outside of Thailand who can bring ideas and capability, and how do we do that? I think about, I mean, this is obviously what's good about CP. So we spoke about Mordi. Mordi is True Health. They've now built these booths, many Lotus, because CP own Lotus. So there are now these True Health booths where you can walk up and do an in-person consult, partly in person, partly through teleconsultation, starting to appear inside Lotus. And because nearly every Lotus has a pharmacy embedded in it, I get a prescription, I turn up, I can actually get seen, and I get advised, and I can go pick up my prescription and then walk out. One-stop service. This is where we're headed. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have some time now for questions. I think we already have some online, I understand. But anyone in the room have any questions they'd like to ask us? Please feel free.
One question? Any questions?
Maybe I'm coming from a healthcare device company. I think the challenge that we see here is what you're talking about, aged care, will not grow to a mass unless the government gets involved. Right now, the reimbursement is purely driven towards hospital care. So as you said, an unemployed Thai citizen, I would get full government healthcare reimbursement if I'm admitted in a hospital. Whereas if I'm going to a aged village or center, I would have to pay from out of pocket. Not only staying, which is okay, but also all medical care. So therein the market will not, for us as a medical device company, we are actively involved in home care in many European countries. But in Thailand, we're looking in this market, but it cannot grow unless the government does it. There's some interest. They have done a pilot study now in Surin, Nakhon Ratchasima, and Buriram for aged, let's say, related diseases. But that's a very small segment. So I think they're concerned about the cost of the health budget exploding. And that's where let's say, it will still be a niche market for expats and the rich Thais, let's put it this way.
Unfortunately, I think you're right for now. But I do see a signal, like a direction of change. So I said about Sirirat now have a geriatric medicine center that they opened in February this year. That was a direct response to the first association community meeting, which started in 2019, hosted by the King, on how do we actually come together to solve this problem. So what I love about Thailand is we take a long time to decide something, but when we actually decide to do it, we do it really quickly. I think about how long it took the debates about extending the SkyTrain. But once we decided to extend the SkyTrain in Thailand, in Bangkok, bang, 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 like a couple of years all the way out to Phuket, right? And we take so long to consensus and have that conversation. But once we actually decide to act on it, we act on it pretty well. And so now that there are people deciding to do something, I just don't know how long the deciding acting gap is. But we're already starting to see part of it happen. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, there needs to be like a GPO response to this, which is how do you have a price list? How do you have all of that? And that is a market access question, it's a regulation question, and it's a funding question. What I would say is we're already seeing parts of it respond. So Sawang Kaniwet is actually built and operated by the Thai Red Cross. And what they do is you turn up, you pay a fee to essentially buy the unit, and you pay a small rental every month. And then when you no longer need that unit is then put back into the hands of the organization, and they sell it on again. And there is on-site care facilities and bits and pieces. And so there is a way that we're starting to see the convergence of these ideas, but I don't know how long it's going to take to really become to the fore.
Yeah, maybe just to add my view, I agree with you as well. I think the government need to be pushing, and this is on their agenda, right? The whole age society healthcare, but yeah, maybe they don't yet know exactly how to fix it. So we need that push from the government. But I do think there is also an education process needed of the Thai people and even expats here. Like you said earlier, David, that will you have of 40 to 60 years of not working that you're going to have to fund. And again, I think, in today's age, we all, we often live in the present and maybe don't think about that's tomorrow's problem. I'll think about that. But again, I think if we can educate the families and maybe the young generation, okay, you need to think about how you're going to look after your parents or your grandparents, plus the insurers, the banks, what are the financial products that they can bring in to support that? And then, yeah, obviously the government comes in as well, but I think you need all of those parties to, all of those things to come together. The government aren't going to fix this on their own.
And it's not a short-term problem, mate. So the number I gave earlier, the average estimation today to retire at the age of 60 and live a comfortable life, 4.3 million baht in savings. 54% of people hit retirement age in Thailand with no savings. 20% hit with debt. That's the complete opposite of 4.3 million baht to live happily through retirement. So it's a long-term problem that we need to solve now, and I'm looking at some of the people in the room, and I had this conversation recently with somebody. We need, as a society, to get much better at financial education. We need to get much better at the generation that is now entering the workforce. Start thinking about this now. And what I mean by that is, I'm lucky that my niece, so she's a pharmacist by education. She now works at one of the pharmaceuticals as a seller. Not even in her 30s yet, already has LTF, SSF, Provident Fund, actively saving into all of those things because she knows that she's looking at this problem when she gets to 60. That's what we need as a general response to this problem, is we don't have people hitting mandatory retirement age, fall off a fiscal cliff, fall out of housing because they maybe work for the government and they've got nothing to catch them, right? And unfortunately, one of the changes I've seen for the worse, as I said earlier, when I first moved here 21 years ago, totally common to have 3 or 4 generations living under a roof. Not so common anymore. Multi-generational living isn't a thing anymore. Part of it is because older people feel that they can live on their own for independent living, which is a good thing. But what that does mean with Thais getting married later, deferring having children, maybe not having children at all, is that whole idea about I've worked, I've had a productive life, I'm retired, I'm going to look after my grandkids while my children go and work, and as part of that, I get an income. That whole safety net is rapidly falling away. That scaffolding is falling away quickly. And we are slow as a demographic, as a society, to respond to that problem. So it's, as I said, it's a government problem, it's a regulation problem, it's a banking problem. It's like there's so many parts of this problem. Hopefully we've been able to highlight some of those levers that we can pull, but it needs a coordinated response.
And maybe I see we've got a question online as well from Kuntanarat. I think on a similar vein, due to Thailand's personal income range is wide and most of them have low savings, how can we serve that middle tier income who maybe do have funds, but it's limited? So yeah, I don't know, David, any thoughts on that? I think it's similar to what we've just said. I think there's an education, but maybe there's also, I think we need to acknowledge that whatever services and solutions we develop for the age society, there will have to be a tiering system, different levels of affordability. Yeah, anything you want to share on that point, David?
I think if I look at it, I generally think as a technologist, I will look at the technology here as a way of solving the problem. Because I'm guessing all of you in the room, your phone is on an unlimited data plan. You can use as much data as you want, right? So therefore, if I was to do video consult, teleconsult, all of that stuff, it doesn't actually cost me any additional money because I'm already paying for the data consumption part of that. So that is part of the solution, is how do you have that tiering? It's widely accepted in the healthcare community that for most things, talking to a professional on the end of a video line is absolutely directly comparable to going into an office and seeing them. The difference being, I can do that from my home. I don't have bus fees, train fees, blah, 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 all that stuff, fares, taxi fares. Just the fact that you turn up in the hospital, you get the patient fee, turn up in the hospital, that's extra cost, right? All of those things can be flattened out because we can use things we already have in our pocket to do a lot of that stuff. So that's one part of the problem. But I think the only way that we can really cross-subsidize those tiers is we need to fill the top of the pipe with people who probably sit 2 floors above here who will retire, might not have any kids, very wealthy, high income. Those people need to think more about subsidizing the bottom. And that might sound like a very liberal socialist response to the problem, but ultimately it's what we have to have until we can really lift ourselves out of this uncomfortable place we're in, which we're still very much a heavy manufacturing agricultural society with this problem. This is why when we say Thailand got old before it got rich, we haven't really built that weightless economy, those high-paying jobs that allow that top of the funnel to be packed out with high earners who can subsidize the rest of the channel.
Okay. So we have a few more questions online. Anyone else in the room, feel free to ask if you have questions. So let me take one here. There's one, how active is the M&A market in aged care? So I've mentioned it a few times. I would say, so let me start with healthcare broadly. M&A is quite active. We get lots of inquiries and transactions around healthcare in general, whether that's hospitals, life sciences, that is very active. Now, when it comes to aged care, actually, interestingly, I would say it's active, but it's in a sort of narrower space because there are only selected sort of parties maybe who are coming together to try and target this particular space. And obviously, as we've mentioned, it's also a function of the fact that this market is still maturing, developing. It's not like anyone can come and buy up a load of aged care centers in Thailand because they're still developing, being built. So what I would say is it's active, and as I've mentioned, we've had discussions, inquiries from overseas operators who are looking to partner. We know there's some partnerships already formed, and some of those have already led to successful establishment of JVs. So it's active, it's coming, but yeah, as I would say it's in a small niche area, but we're definitely seeing those inquiries increase. And what I would expect is as we see it develop, mature, yeah, there'll be more players trying to enter into the space, maybe through minority investments. There's capital funding needed to build all of these things. I think we'll see a lot of, whether it's financial investors in Thailand or some of the large corporates in Thailand, I think they'll be looking to take minority shares in some of these JVs as they get set up.
I think joining some of those things together, I think the opportunity here is also, as we said, Thailand was ranked 7th as a place to retire, like if you're British or whatever. Someone like that coming in from overseas who can pay full value, full price for the services we can provide locally, which is still a fraction of the cost it would have to do that at home in Germany or Spain or the UK or wherever, Australia. That is actually probably, for me, the biggest opportunity to cross-subsidize aged care in Thailand. That inbound investment, essentially, because someone like me pays to have my parents retire in Thailand and live happily, comfortably. Those people will be how we actually generate the liquidity in the market.
Okay, and we have another question online. What are the main overseas target markets for selling care services and lifestyle retirement options to? So I think we alluded to this a bit earlier. Europe, those kind of countries, as you said, the ones that...
Anybody that has winter would want to come and live here, where we have basically 12 months of summer, right?
Yeah, I think that for me it's that sort of Europe, UK, France, Germany, maybe. I don't know about other ASEAN, ASPAC countries. David, do you have a view on that, whether we'd attract any of those?
So it's a challenge because, I mean, they have the same situation themselves. Yeah, I talked about Malaysia already. Malaysia actually is probably, for many people, expats at least, a better option than Thailand, unfortunately. I would say, for the things we talked about, targeting some of those countries that have a failed healthcare system is the place to go. And the reason for that is BDMS, Bumrungrad, Samiti Wade, like they are world-class hospitals in their own right. I don't have to compromise on my healthcare by retiring to Thailand, or my dentistry, right? Japanese come to Thailand, come and book a round of golf and get their teeth done at the same time, because dental treatment in Thailand is as good as Japan, but a fraction of the price. Healthcare tourism is a thing for a reason. So I can come and live here and live very comfortably on a reasonably low pension from the UK, and I don't have to compromise anything in terms of healthcare standards. So that for me is the where do you go? Who's got a failing healthcare system? And pretty much all of them. Like Australia,
US as
US
well, right?
broken, Australia, New Zealand falling over, UK underfunded, oversubscribed, on its knees. Great opportunity for Thailand, right? Assuming you have the money to have private health insurance. I probably wouldn't recommend, I mean, I love the way we have a good balance between private and public. I would not ask my mother to go to somewhere like Sirirat and queue up at 5 a.m. But I would happily walk her into Piatai and go and get world-class treatment at a fraction of the cost. Right.
Okay. Another question online, asking for a bit more information about the New Zealand case study and how they combine the sharing of data with compliance, data protection, which I think is a great question. And as you alluded to earlier, we do have challenges. This is one of the big challenges we need to fix in Thailand as well.
Yeah.
The data sharing with the health system.
So New Zealand compared to Thailand is a little bit unique in so much as, well, UK does this too. There is a central spine of all patient information is put in one central place. And how that started in New Zealand was actually a contracted sharing agreement. So I work with this provincial healthcare system. I sit on the border. I actually can go either side. If I turn left, I go to Dunedin. If I turn right, I go somewhere else. And so they actually, what 8Wire did is they actually have this sharing agreement. I set up this contract and says, Party A is willing to share this information and only this information at this level of personalization to Party B. Party B is willing to receive that information, so it's a bit like GDPR in that sense, and there's data stewards and data processors, and they have that, and it's all, and then that contract is then executed through code, through business rules. That's how they do it. In other parts of the world, we talk about multi-party machine learning, and what does that really mean? What that means is I am BDMS and Bumrungrad and Sinpet hospitals. And we all have information about patients with, I don't know, doesn't really matter, hyperthyroidism, right? And Cleveland Clinic has allowed us to use a machine learning algorithm that allows us to look at the symptoms of hyperthyroidism. But it needs to run and we get a response. Now, I can run that machine learning model against each of those hospitals individually, and I get a result. But if I can run it against the aggregate data of all of those hospitals together, I'll get a much better result. So in technology, we call that multi-party machine learning, and we talk about, it's essentially a contract, an enclave, a secure enclave that says none of that is ever shared. No party can see everybody else's information. It's all encrypted. This is basically how 8Wire works. I only can see the information I put in, and I only see the information the response to the information I put in gets put out. I don't see anybody else's information. I can't see it, don't have access to it, it's encrypted. So 8Wire is SOC 2 compliant. It's got all the right standards from a information security perspective. And it all runs on public cloud infrastructure that is also backed up by SOC 2 compliance, HIPAA compliance, all of that stuff. So that's how they're able to get away with it. And it comes down to the party saying, we are willing and able to share this information for these purposes. And so what it looks like for them, what it would look like for us, is insurance company 1 says, I am willing to work with you, hospital 2. Hospital 2 will share the health claims information online, not by form. And then we get that aggregate set of information that allows analytics and other things to work. And that teleconsultation process, what I would do as a patient is go, okay, I'm insured by these 2 insurers, and I normally go to these 3 hospitals. As a patient, I am giving you the right to ask those parties for my information on my behalf so you can provide me better treatment. So it comes down to an individual agreement at that level. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions from anyone in the room? Okay. All right. I think, yeah, we've got no more questions online. David, we have a few more minutes. We're happy to wrap up early. Anything else you wanted to share or reflections from today's discussion?
I think I've shared enough already. No, I just come back to, you know, I'm hopeful that this problem can be solved. It is being solved in other countries. Those countries are more expensive than us, but we can learn from them like we always do, right? We learned how to do elevated public transport, and we run it at a fraction of the price of New York. Like, we can do this. But it does mean that as a nation, we need to do the thing that unfortunately we do too often. We stop need to do the thing we unfortunately do too often, which is we are Thai. We were never colonized by a European nation. We're not Malaysia. We're not Singapore. We're not Cambodia. We're not Vietnam. And we're proud. And that's great. I love the pride that Thailand has in its history. We're at a point, though, where we can't solve all of these problems on our own. We have to be willing to accept ideas from outside of Thailand, learn from it, and then create a Thailand response to that. Take an idea, integrate it into what works for us. We're no longer in a place where we can afford to invent the solution to the situation on our own. The problem is here, the problem is now, and we need a way to work on solving it.
Okay, thanks, David. And so we will share the material afterwards with everyone who attended online or physically. And please do give us some feedback. So you can do the QR code. I think we'll send the link round afterwards as well. Anything we can do better or other topics you'd like us to cover in future events, please let us know. But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining online. And for those of you who came into the office, we really appreciate it. And yeah, hope you found the session useful. Thank you very much.
ขอบคุณมากครับ
ขอบคุณครับ